Hi, my name's John. Today we're going to be making sourdough bread. This is one of my favorite pastimes at home. It's really simple and a lot of fun. First, I'm going to walk you through what you're going to need, and then we're going to walk through the steps. Let's get started. Here's the equipment and ingredients you'll need to make sourdough bread. A digital scale, a mixing bowl, a stand mixer with a dough hook attachment, non-wax parchment paper, flexible bowl scraper, a Banneton so the bread can hold its shape, a sharp paring knife or bread lom, a Dutch oven to bake your bread, 230 grams of room temperature water, 16 grams of wheat flour, 16 grams of rye flour, 297 grams of unbleached bread flour, 16 grams of hot water, 7 grams of sea salt. You can typically get a sourdough starter from a friend, family member, or even a local bakery. But if you'd like to make your own, it's incredibly simple, and here's how you do it. Get a jar with 100 grams of room temperature water, then add a mixture of 50 grams wheat and 50 grams rye flour. Mix these together until you get a paste-like consistency. Cover loosely with plastic wrap and leave out room temperature. In 24 hours, discard half of it and add the same amount of flour and water. Do this for several days until you start to see bubbles. This is a sign of fermentation. Once you start to see bubbles, change your feed and discard schedule to every 12 hours. Continue doing this for several days. It could take up to 2 weeks, so don't get discouraged if it takes longer than you're expecting, but eventually your sourdough starter will start to grow in volume. Once it doubles or even triples in volume within 12 hours, you know it's ready to use. At this point, we can also change what we feed it. We're still going to feed it equal parts flour and water, but we're going to change the flour mixture to 90% all-purpose flour, 10% wheat flour. And when you're not using the sourdough starter, you can store it in the refrigerator. Simply feed it, cover it, put it in the refrigerator, and then pull it out 12 hours before you're ready to bake. This way you don't have to feed it every day anymore. Now let's discuss the process for making sourdough bread. In the bowl of your stand mixer, start with 230 grams of water and 67 grams of sourdough starter. The sourdough starter should float a little bit. This is a good sign. That's how you know it's ready. Mix until combined. Then mix in your wheat and rye flour. Finally, add 297 grams of unbleached bread flour. Mix on low speed until all of the flour is absorbed. It's okay if there are some small lumps, these will smooth out later. Cover with a damp kitchen towel and come back in 1 hour. Alright, here we are 1 hour later. We're going to add 7 grams of sea salt dissolved in 16 grams of hot water. Mix on low speed for about 5 minutes. Once the dough comes together into a smooth mass, transfer to a clean bowl, cover for 30 minutes. Alright, 30 minutes later, we're going to do what's called a stretch and fold. Turn the dough over onto itself, turn the bowl a quarter turn, and repeat. We're going to do this all the way around and then cover back up with a damp kitchen towel. We're going to do this every 30 minutes for 2 hours. So in total, you'll have 4 stretch and folds. And be sure to pay attention to how much your dough volume increases between each stretch and fold. Knowing how your dough responds will help you understand what to adjust in the future if you have any problems with ambient temperature changes. Here we are for the 4th and final stretch and fold. After this one, we're going to cover it for 2 hours and come back for the pre-shape. So here's what our dough should look like 2 hours later. Take your flexible bowl scraper and turn the dough onto a well-floured work surface. Be careful not to knock out too much of the air that we've built in our dough. Then we're going to get some flour on our hands, and we're going to do what's called a pre-shape. Turn the dough towards you, then from one side pull it over, from the other side pull it over, and then turn it around, and then we're going to kind of roll it up. Then we're going to cover it for 20 minutes either with a dry kitchen towel or even a bowl turned upside down. So 20 minutes later, we're going to flip our dough upside down and do essentially the same thing. We're going to pull it towards ourselves, pull it over from both sides, and then when we roll it up, we want to try to build some tension this time. The reason we do this is to give our dough a good structure. So roll it kind of tightly without smashing it, and then kind of pull it towards you and let the friction of the dough sticking to the table build some tension for you. Then we can lightly dust the loaf with all-purpose flour and add it to our Banneton. We put it in the Banneton so it can proof. Take your Banneton, lightly dust it with wheat flour, turn your dough over and set it inside of it, cover it with a dry kitchen towel, and then we're going to let it rest for 2 hours and then put it in the refrigerator overnight. Here we are the next day. We've left our dough in the refrigerator overnight for 2 reasons. 1, because cold dough is easier to work with, but 2, flavor development in bread takes time. So if we can slow down the proofing process in the refrigerator, it adds flavor. So flip your dough over onto the parchment paper, but slowly pull away. The dough may try to stick, but that's okay. As long as you pull slowly, it won't tear. I like to dust off the excess flour and trim the parchment paper, but this is completely optional. Now take a sharp paring knife or a bread lom, which is a bread cutting tool, and cut at a 45-degree angle down the length of the bread. It doesn't need to be very deep, we just need an area that steam can release. Now very carefully place the dough on a Dutch oven that has been preheated to 500 degrees. Put the lid on and bake for 15 minutes. After baking for 15 minutes, carefully remove the lid away from yourself so the steam does not hit you. Bake for another 10, maybe 15 minutes depending on your oven until golden brown. When the bread is done, carefully remove it to a wire rack to cool. You do not want to cut the bread immediately. Bread is still cooking when it comes out of the oven. Let it cool for at least 2 to 4 hours and enjoy. No matter how you decide to enjoy your sourdough bread, it can be a fun, rewarding process. It just takes time, patience, and practice, but most of all, have fun.